Recording today's class. We didn't have this one last year. Very interesting class. And we're going to begin. We might go into a little bit the second part. The first part is about the journey, the 42 steps where the Jewish people stopped from when they left Mitzrayim. And the next part of the class, which maybe we'll begin today and then continue tomorrow, is what are the borders of Eretz Yisrael. So we're holding the beginning of the last parsha of the fourth book of the Torah. It's called Parshas Maaseh, which means the travels of the Jews in the desert. And then it goes on to tell you exactly how much stops there were. And then it's important to know the borders of Israel because, as Rashi will tell us, there are certain areas which are in Israel when we know the border, and there's certain areas which are out of Israel. And it makes a very big difference knowing when you're in Israel or when you're out of Israel, because the mitzvahs change. There are certain mitzvahs that are required only in the land of Israel. And that's why we need to know what's in Israel and what's not. Let's count together the first Rashi here. I just want to show you in the map how many stops there were and where most of the stops were taken. So if you count on the map, they started from Ramses. Over here, you'll see point number 1 in the map. And then they went to Sukkot 2, to Eitam 3, Piachirot 4, Mara 5, Elam 6, the Sea of Reed 7, Sin Desert 8, Dafka 9, Alush 10, Refidim 11, and 12, Mount Sinai. So there were 12 of the 42 stops were just to get to Mount Sinai. Okay, 8 of the last stops, and I'll work backwards, were to get from after the Jews finished wandering in the desert, just to get to Israel. So let's count backwards. The plains of Moab, 1. Plains of the Passes, mountain of the Passes, 2. Almon 3. Gidon 4. The ruins of Passes, 5. Ovot 6. Punon 7. Salmona 8. And the one before was Har HaHar. So there were 8 stops after Har HaHar. Aaron, the high priest, passed away on Har HaHar. So remember, 8 was the last foot of the journey. 12 was the beginning of the journey. So 20 of the 42 stops were in between the beginning of the journey and the end of the journey. And that's very important. Rashi is saying to tell you, and we'll go through now the verses, and I'll point out the map as we go through, hopefully. That was to tell you that that Hashem, when it made the Jews travel and wait in the desert for 38 years till everybody should pass away, who was already 20 years old at the sin of the spies, you don't know how many stops there were. Well, if we do know, as in today's parsha tells us that there were a total of 42, and then 12 of them were just to get to Mount Sinai, and 8 of them were just to get to Israel from after Aaron passed away, then out of the 38 years that the Jews were left in the desert, there were only 22 stops in that 38-year period. Let's just, and he shows you here, if you want to look inside, I don't know if we should go back to the map each time when we read the verses inside, but basically after Ritma, right here, this area where Ritma is where the Jews sent the spies and the whole problem happened. Then they started going down to Rimon Peretz, Livna, Risa, Kihilasa, Mount Shefer, Arada, Malkiot, right here. They kind of almost went all the way back to Mount Sinai, and then they started going back up again. And those are the 22 stops until Har HaHar, till Kadesh, where they asked the Edomites permission to go through their land. Basically, it was not a terrible journey. It's not like Hashem was making them travel the whole time. And it was over 22 years, over a 38-year period, as I don't know, is they had to move once every 2 years. So it wasn't the worst situation. I want to just point out one more thing. The longest journey, and that's where I think the Jews complained about the way, was from Mount Sinai to Kivros HaTaiva. You see how the map goes all the way north from Mount Sinai, which is to the south, all the way up to Kivros HaTaiva. And Hashem was trying to get the Jews to Israel as quick as possible. And that's why Hashem was rushing the journey, because he wanted to get them in already. But the Jews, instead of being happy about it, weren't happy and said, oh, we're making a schlep so much, no resting time. And they started to complain. Let us go to today's Chumash now that we see the map a little bit. We're holding the middle of today's Chumash. Actually, we left off, I believe. Let's see if we can find it, which is the beginning of this week's Parsha, because it's a double Torah portion. So we were finishing today. We read this already yesterday. We're finishing today the second to last Parsha, Matos, and we're beginning today the last Parsha, Parshas Maaseh. So let's do it together inside. Eila Maaseh B'nai Yisrael. These are the journeys of B'nai Yisrael, of the Jewish people. Asher Yatsu Meretz Mitzrayim, that left Egypt. These are the journeys, the Tzavaisam, in their legions, in their groups. The Yad Moshe v'Aaron, in the hands of Moshe and Aaron, took these people out and he led them to the area where they needed to go. So Rashi, as I told you, says, do the math. Take the 42 stops, cut out the first 12, cut out the last 8. You're really only left with 22. And you realize that the Jews were not traveling like crazy. It wasn't like Hashem was making them move every week, every day to the next destination. But it basically was a spread besides the first part of the journey, which they were trying to go to where they were heading. The last part of the journey where they were trying to get to that destination, it was only 22 stops over a 38-year period. So which tells us that Hashem was very nice to the Jews. Hashem did not make them schlep around so much. But when he had to keep them in the desert, he only made them move, whatever it was, an average of once in 2 years. Another explanation Rashi gives here as to why is it that Hashem is like recounting here that that's where the travelings were. And Rashi says, and based on the commentary, Gur Aryeh, that it was trying to show how much Hashem loved the Jewish people. The same way, imagine a guy had a son who was sick, and it was a long journey traveling to the doctor to get a cure for the son. And the father took his son and traveled that whole long journey. And on the way back, once his son was cured, he takes his son back and he says, remember, here we stopped. You needed us to put on this bandage. And you needed us to get this drink for you over here. And basically the child, as he's getting older and he's getting help by his father, is realizing how much the father does for the child. So that's a little bit about why we're recounting the second explanation in Rashi, why we're recounting the whole journey that the Jewish people travel. Let's do it inside. A lot of just names of cities I showed you in the map, but we'll just do it now. Moshe started their starting points of their journeys and writing it down as they traveled, al pi Hashem, based on the word of Hashem, where they went. This is where they traveled. So first is going to recount the first 12 stops. They left the city of Ramses, which was a city in Egypt. The first month, on the 15th day of the first month, which is right by Pesach. That's when we have Pesach. The day after Pesach, after the Jews brought on the 14th of night, they brought had their Pesach sacrifice of that year. The next day, first day of Pesach, the Jewish people went out triumphantly in front of the eyes of all the Egyptians, exalted, and so on. And now, verse 4 describes that leaving journey from Egypt. Mitzrayim, what were the Egyptians doing as the Jews were leaving? The Kabrim es Asher Hika Hashem, they were burying all those people. We know Hashem Smith, the firstborns, it was, and so on. So they were busy burying their people, and that helped that the Egyptians should not hinder the Jews' progress because they were busy burying their dead. They were burying all the firstborns. And Hashem did tremendous miracles against the deities that the Egyptians served, their gods, their deities. Hashem did the plagues against them. The Jewish people traveled from that first city of Ramses that was in Egypt, and they left. And they moved to the second stop, Sukkos. They traveled from Sukkos. And they traveled on the third stop called Esam. That is at the edge of the desert. So if I were to go back to the picture, meanwhile Ramses to Sukkos, and then it's very interesting. They went around the Red Sea. They didn't go through the Red Sea yet, but they went around to Esam, which is at the end, I guess as we know today, as a big Sinai desert, right at the edge of the desert. That is where they went to now. Now, part of the plan, you'll see, it's very interesting. If you look at the map, Jewish people went into the desert and went out to the desert. I think one of the reasons we learned when we were learning the original story, the point was to make the Egyptians think they're lost, and now they're going to attack and start running after the Jews because they feel like the Jews said they wanted to go, but they don't know where they're going. Okay. And they traveled from Esam, which was at the edge of the desert, the big desert. And they returned backwards to the place called, their next stop called Piachiros. And their stop now is by the idol Tzafon. And they camped in front of Migdal. So basically, if I remember correctly, Rashi taught us at that time that they were kind of camping now near one of the idols that Hashem had not destroyed from the Egyptians, giving the Egyptians the mistaken thought that they could actually attack the Jews. And they're right near their idol that wasn't destroyed by Hashem so far, the one idol that they might think that is stronger, so to say, than Hashem. Right after that stop, they went into the ocean. That's where they crossed into the Red Sea, into the desert. And they traveled for 3 days. Yachnu b'Mara, and they camped in a place called Mara. Yisum b'Mara, they went to Mara. They came to a place called Elema, Ve'elim, Shtei Mesrei Einos Mayim, and that stopped. There were 12 springs of water, B'Shivim Tamarim, and 70 fig trees, 70 palm trees. Yachnu Sham, and they camped over there. But Yisum Elim, again, the first 12 stops, he's telling you of Yachnu al Yamsuf, they went, they camped along the other side now of the Yamsuf, of the Red Sea. But Yisum Yamsuf, Yachnu Midmarsin, and then they traveled from the Yamsuf to Midmarsin. Yisum Midmarsin, Yachnu Midafka, and they traveled from the desert of Sin into a place called Dafka. Yisum Dafka, Yachnu Ba'alish, and they went to Alish. Yisum Alish, Yachnu B'Refidim. They went to the stop of Refidim. But like, and over there was no water for the Jewish people to drink. And finally, they traveled from Refidim to their final stop of the first leg of their journey at the Sinai desert. And that is where they received the Torah, and they built the tabernacle, and all that took place at this 12th stop of their original journey out of Mitzrayim. And then they make a beeline to go north to Eretz Yisrael. So just going back to the map for a second, we spoke about the 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, or I'm guess counting the Ramses, it's 12 from their first stop. And now they're going to beeline straight, go to Israel. And they're going to stop in Kivras Hataiva. And then they're going to go to Chatzeres. And then Rimah, 3 stops later, literally, is where they're about to go into Israel, and the spies sin take place. And then they have to go back and wander for another 22 stops in the desert because of their mistake. They traveled from the Sinai desert where they got the Torah and everything, and they went to Kivras Hataiva, in the area called Kivras Hataiva, which we learned about when we were learning the original story. And they traveled from there to a place called Chatzeros. Finally, they stopped in Risma. And it's called Risma because that's where the slander the word Risma refers to the Ra, I guess, Rosh Lashon Hara, Remia, trickery that the spies gossiped about, or Gachli Resamim. Another word they use for this is coals of brooms. I guess that's a reference to Risma, that the spies spoke terrible gossip about Eretz Yisrael. And that's what it's called Risma, and that's where the disaster of the Jews now having to stay in Israel, in the desert for another 38 years traveled. And the next 22 stops he's going to list there as they wandered within, I showed you in the map here, as they travel now within this small section within the Sinai desert to the south of Israel. They travel over here in this area by the Paran desert, by the Tzin desert, and to wait till everyone that needs to passes away, that was 20 years and up during this problem of the spies. Okay. So they start going wandering desert. They stop at a place called Rimim Paretz. And then they stop in a place called Livna. And then they stop in a place called Rissa. And then they go to a place called Keilasa. And they go to a place called Har Shafer. Yisum Har Shafer in Harada was the next stop. Yisum Harada and the next stop is Makelois. Yisum Makelois, and then the next stop is Vyachnu B'Sachas. Yisum B'Sachas, Vyachnu B'Sarach, Yisum B'Sarach, Vyachnu B'Miska. Then they go to a place called Mischa, Sarach, and the Mischa. Then Chashmaina, Yisum B'Miska, Vyachnu B'Chashmaina. And then Chashmaina they went Vyachnu B'Maiseira, and then Yisum B'Maiseira, Vyachnu B'Bnei they stopped in a place called Vayakov, Yisum B'nei Yakan, and then they stop in a place called V'Chard Hagid God. Yisum Char Hagid God, Vyachnu B'Yatvasa. Finally they got to Yatvasa, Yisum Yatvasa, Vyachnu B'Avreina. They got to a place called Avreina, Yisum Avreina. They went to a place called Vyachnu Etzin Gover. They stopped in a place called Etzin Gover, Yisum Etzin Gover, Vyachnu B'Mertzin. Finally, we're in the desert Sin, Kadesh, which is the place called Kadesh. So that is now, those are the areas, I guess, if you want to count them, you can count them now too, and see from Risma is where the spies happened. So then it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Can't really see here. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Something's off on my map. Maybe it is just, I saw a discussion about, so maybe it's going to be 40 stops. I think it's 42 stops. But anyway, right now we're holding, unless we count also the place they left from, I'm not sure. There's a discussion about Rashi somewhere here. But the bottom line is they're by Kadesh, which is by Edom, and they're going to ask Edom permission to cross through their land and go straight up to Israel so they can go in from the Jordan Sea. Edom won't let, so they're going to go back down and go around. Let's see inside over here. Unless I think we also learned maybe they went back a few stops. I'm not sure about that. Let's go on. Let's go inside the Chumash. So Kadesh, V'yachnu Barahar, they went to the mountain on top of a mountain where they buried Aaron. It's Edom, and that was to the south, as you saw on the map, of the border of Edom. Yal Aaron, over there Aaron went up, Al Hora Hora on the mountain, called the mountain on top of a mountain, Al Pi Hashem, based on the word of Hashem, V'yam Hashem, and he passed away there, Rishnas Arboyim, says exactly 40 years after the Jews left Egypt, but it was in the 5th month, and he passed away there. And as Rashi says, by God's mouth, meaning by like a kiss from Hashem. And Aaron was 123 years old, but when he passed away by that mountain. And we all know what happened. Another story that happened there, he's mentioning some of the stories, the big points in history. The Canaanites, I think they were really, he said, Amalekites who were dressed up like Canaanites. And Melech Arad, the king of Arad, who then was living in the south of Eretz Canaan, in the land of Canaan. The Bnei Yisrael, they heard that the Jewish people had arrived, and they heard that Aaron passed away, as Rashi explains, and that the clouds left, thinking the Jewish magical protection that was protecting them has left, and they went to attack the Jewish people. And finally, the last leg of the journey, the last day, it stopped. They went from Arahar, and they went to a place called Tzalmaina. They went to a place called Funoin, they went to a place called Funoin, and they started getting closer to passing the land of sorry guys, 1 second, just messed up over here. They started getting closer as they pass here, they're going along the border of Edom and Moab, and they're going to end up right here by the plains of Moab, by the Jordan River. Okay, 1 second, sorry guys. Let me share again. Where was I here? Okay, continuing right along. God left the ruins and they went to Divyan God. Divyan God. They went to a place called they camped by the mountains of the Ivarim. They moved from the mountains of the crossways, in the plains of Moab, right by Yarden Yerecha, the Jordan River, which they will cross and pass over, God willing, with Yeshua after Moshe passes away. And we learned that in our Navi class. And they camped by the Jordan River, along by the Beis Shimon area, Ad Evel. Now he's telling you how wide their camp was. The camp went from one place called Beis Shimon until Avel Hashitim, Arvis Moav, and this campsite was by Arvis Moav. Now, what's interesting about it is I think it's maybe the only time or the first time that the Torah is telling us the borders of their camp. So it says they went from one place, Beis Shimon, to another place called Abel Shittim. And Rashi says this is very good information because the Gemara will learn out if now that we know how big the camp was, from which area to what area. We now know, I guess at that time, the Rabbah, a scholar called Rabbah, son of Chana, says he was in that area, and I guess he knew where those two locations were, and he was able to measure it, or he knew the distance. The distance was 12 mil, about 12 kilometers. So he's saying we now know, now that we know how far it was at the Jews' camp, we being that we know how far the Jews camped, we can actually estimate that it was about 12 kilometers. By 12 kilometers, I believe, was the square distance of the camp of the Jewish people. And that's the end of the first part of Chumash. I'm going to go in a little bit to the next part. Just want to get started because, again, these are some complicated things could be. Let me just show you. Not really complicated when you have the maps. So I took a picture also of the map of Eretz Yisrael. Let's see if I could get that for you here. And I want to look with you at the border of the map of Eretz Yisrael. Let's see if I have it right here. So, as I said, he's going to now go into the border, trying to tell you the border. He's basically going to start, say the border goes, the southern border goes from the tip of the Dead Sea until the Egyptian stream of Egypt. Okay, that creates the border between Eretz Yisrael, Israel, and Canaan at that time, and Egypt. Now, the border, I guess, as we'll see in the Torah, did not go a straight beeline, but the border, it tells you, went around, hung out, pushed out, outwards, south, as it says, it went around Sin, it went around Kadesh Barnea, Chatzis Adar, and Atzmon, meaning that it went from the Dead Sea to the corner of the Mediterranean Sea, where it hit where it matched up to Egypt, but it didn't go straight line. It obviously went downwards, as you can see in the map, between the two places. So let's see if we could see it. Just begin the map today, and we'll continue tomorrow if we're able to see this idea in the Chumash as we continue. Let me see Thursday's class. Okay. Hashem spoke to Moshe in the plains of Moab, right? They were along the Jordan River in the plains of Moab, right? Moab was to their south by the Jordan River, saying, speak to the Jewish people of Martalim and say to them, and here he actually gives them some of the biggest important commands about crossing over the Jordan River and entering into Eretz Canaan, the land of Canaan. And Rashi says he keeps on warning them again and again, and he tells them, this is imperative for the Jewish being successful in the land of Israel. We do not want them learning from the ways of the nations that live there, because if they do, as the verse will say, they will be, instead of the nations of the world getting kicked out, they will be the ones to get kicked out of Israel. Israel cannot tolerate and handle people doing idol worship and doing some of the immoralities of the nations that were there at the time. And therefore, he's telling you, even when you just cross over, as Rashi says, the Jordan River, you must cross over for the right intent. And that is that you're clearly going to do the job that you're commanded to do when you get to Eretz Yisrael. And what is that job that you're commanded to do? You're commanded to wipe out, get rid of the nations that live there, because if not, the nations that live there will harass you. And we know this to be true today, that many people living in Eretz Yisrael continue to harass and abuse the Jewish people as they're living in the land. Let's see inside the next passage. And you will drive out the dwellers of the land from before you. Chase them out, as Rashi explains. And also Hashem says, I want you to destroy all their temples. As Rashi says, they used to make these marble floors that they would bow on to their idols, to their deities. That's called Salmi Masei, and all their molten idols. You should destroy them as Tashmidim and all their high places. They had these areas which were high places, and they're being commanded by Hashem to not leave any of them when they take over. You must get rid of all the high places and all the idolatry in order for the Jews sojourning in the land now to be successful. Verse 53, and you will clear out the land, and you will live in it. The Jewish people live in it. Kilachem nasati Esa'aretz, because I gave it to you. I want this land. Hashem says to go to the Jewish people at Eshes in order to inherit it. And if you do not chase out the inhabitants of the land, you will not be successful in living peacefully and inheriting the land of Eretz Yisrael. And how do you know who lives where? As we mentioned this in an earlier class. You will make a lottery. You will give the land as inheritance to the family, to the families. To the larger tribes. At that time, you will give a larger section. To the smaller tribes, you will give a smaller piece of land. And the area which the lottery will fall on, him it will be based on their father's households. And there has to be 12 according to the amount of tribes there are. You have to split it up into 12 counties or so on, 12 states. And it goes based on also, as we said, there was an interesting calculation, exactly who got what, goes back, be inherited based on the original Jews who left Egypt. And if you will not drive out the inhabitants, conquer the land fully, and chase everybody out, you should know people that you're going to leave behind, that you're going to allow to stay there with you in Eretz Yisrael. They're going to be pegs in your eyes, pins in your eyes. They're going to make you trouble. And hedges and thorns in your sides. They're going to harass you. On the land that you will settle in. So like literally like describing Gaza, I guess, or so on. That the people that are there are not going to just live there peacefully with you. There's a commandment from Hashem very clearly to chase out the people that live there. And God forbid, Hashem says that what I was planning on doing to them, I'll end up doing to you. I guess the Jews will learn, and then they're going to get into major trouble by following these corrupt ways of the nations that live there. Getting into the borders of Israel, as I mentioned, we're just going to talk about the south part of the border for today. Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, command the Jewish people, and say to them, you're coming to the land of Canaan. This is the land that will fall to you. What does it mean? that it will fall to you. So first of all, I want to say, as I mentioned earlier, why do we need to know the exact borders of Israel? Because there's certain mitzvahs that you do only in Israel. So it's very important for us to know what exactly are defined the borders of Israel. Now it says these are the lands that will fall to you. Why does the term used in the verse that it's going to fall to you? Because that's how a lottery works. It falls out in whose possession. Unlike, I guess, last night's not lottery. I don't know who played the almost $1 billion lottery, which is $1 billion today, I heard. So if you're waiting for that number, you can go buy a ticket. It falls to the person that it falls to. So the term falling is correct for lotteries. Another explanation is a fascinating explanation that Hashem took the 70 nations of the world, which each of them had a palace in the land of Israel. Everybody wanted to own real estate. Everyone had a piece of real estate in Israel. Hashem took the guardian angels of all those nations and he put them in front of Moshe's foot. And he said, Moshe, like, step on them. He like bent them over before Moshe and said, Moshe, don't worry, the Jewish people will raise above and be stronger and be able to conquer those 70 nations. This can will sell the land of Canaan to its borders. Hashem put down, even though it could be logically, as the spies came back with a negative support and testified that the Jews can't conquer Israel, Hashem is showing Moshe the image that Hashem has taken care of all the work that needs to be done. And even though it's such a powerful, strong land with so many nations, Hashem bent their guardian angels under the Jewish people, and therefore it's not a problem. The last verse for today, V'haya lechem, and it will be to you, Pas Negev, the southern side of Israel, the border of Israel, Midbar Tzin, which is by the desert, the Tzin desert, like we saw on the map, Al Yidei Edom, which is near Edom, which is near the country of Edom. That's the one the Jews wanted to cross. That's the south side of Israel. And the border will go from the sea salt, right? That's to the southeastern side of Israel, from the border, which is by the tip of sea salt by Edomites. And that will go, Yam HaMelech Kedma, that will go to the east, will be the border, will go eastward, be the border to the Rashi says a few interesting things, that there are 9 lands that border Israel. Israel is like a country that's in between many other countries. The Moabites and the Edomites, so many different countries. The king of Sichon was there. Different countries that were there, that the Jewish people that live around the border of the land of Israel. So this is describing part of the border here. Let's continue on to the next verse. The border will turn south. So in other words, it's not going to be a beeline from the Dead Sea towards the Mediterranean, but it's going to turn. It's not, as Rashi says, it's not when he describes like it turns out, meaning it goes around some of the cities that Hashem wants to include in the southern border of Israel. Negev Lamaliach Krabim, going to turn out and go around the border, a place called Malach Krabim, V'avrat Sina and Sina, and it's going to be leading out to Minegev, the Kadesh Barnea, from its south side to the city of Kadesh Barnea, Yatza Chatzar Adar, V'avar Atzmona, it's going to pass around the city of Chatzar Adar, and also Atzmona. Let me see if I can pull it up quickly in the map again for you here, to show you these different names that he's mentioning. The land, you see that Chatzar Adar and Atzmona, Kadesh Barnea, around the Tzin. This is the Tzin, the city called Tzin, and it's going to go all the way around these things come up to the stream that divides Israel and Egypt, and that is going to be the clearly recognized border of the southern section of Eretz Yisrael. Does not look like Eilat is part of there, but Eilat, I don't believe, right, is in the original part of Eretz Yisrael. What else do I want to share with you? No, that's it. That's it for today. And the Mitzvah Hashem will continue with future verses in tomorrow's lesson. Let's stop the recording here.